My dear gentle listeners, I would love to thank you all for bringing this channel to this very moment. Your supports and views mean a lot to me. I do not take it for granted. I love you and I value your supports and attention. Let us continue building. Now, let's start today's story. She had a system. It was not a complicated system. It was not a glamorous system. But it worked, and in the Varrock Palace, working was the only thing that mattered. Every evening, when the great dining hall filled with the noise of the assembled court, the clinking of glasses and the low thunder of alpha voices competing for space, and the specific, performative laughter of wolves trying to be seen by the right people, Maren Ossold took her plate from the kitchen service line and walked to the East Corridor. The East Corridor had a window seat. The window seat was deep enough to sit in comfortably, with a ledge wide enough for a plate and a cup, and it looked out over the palace's inner courtyard where nobody went in the evenings because the courtyard faced north and caught no afternoon sun. Nobody went to the East Corridor either. That was the point. Maren had been eating alone in that window seat for 6 months. 6 months since the Varrock Palace had taken in 32 Omega wolves from dissolving packs across the Western Territory and distributed them through the palace's service and administrative roles. 6 months since she had become, technically, a member of the palace's archival staff. 6 months since the palace's existing wolves had made it clear, in the way that hierarchies make things clear, without saying it directly, without a single incident that could be formally reported, just through the accumulated weight of turned backs and dropped conversations, and the specific quality of being looked through rather than at, that the Omegas were to be tolerated and not included. Maren had adapted. She was good at adapting. She had been adapting her whole life. She ate her dinner in the East Corridor window seat, and she read. Always a book. Always something from the palace's archive that she had borrowed with the quiet, unquestioned freedom of someone whose job it was to be in the archive, and whom nobody was watching carefully enough to notice was taking books home. And she was fine. She was fine. She had told herself this so many times that it had the smooth, well-worn feel of a path walked repeatedly. And then, on the 184th day of her invisible life in the Varrock Palace, she looked up from her book and found the most powerful alpha in the Northern Territories standing in the East Corridor, looking at her, not through her, at her, like he had been looking for a while and had waited for her to look up rather than interrupt. His name was Aldous Vane. He was the High Alpha of the Varrock Court, the governing authority over every pack in the Northern Territory, a position held by his bloodline for 4 generations. He was the kind of powerful that made other powerful people straighten their spines. He was holding a plate, and he said, with the complete calm of a man for whom most things were decided already, "May I sit?" And Maren Ossold, who had eaten alone for 6 months, who had a system, who was fine, said the only thing her stunned brain could produce. "There's only one window seat." And he said, "I'll sit on the floor." If you are new here, subscribe right now, like this video, and drop in the comments where in the world you are watching from. Because this story, it does not go where you think it's going. Stay close. Let me tell you about Maren Ossold before the corridor, before the palace and the system and the 6 months of fine. She grew up in the Lost Ward pack, a small, Western Territory pack that had been, for most of her memory, in the slow process of declining. Not dramatically. Packs rarely decline dramatically. They decline the way most things decline when the conditions stop supporting them, gradually, then all at once. The Lost Ward pack had been losing members to larger packs for a decade, losing territory in small increments to better resourced neighbors, losing the population density that made a pack function as a pack rather than a collection of individual wolves who happened to share a boundary. By the time Maren was 20, the Lost Ward pack had 43 members left. By the time she was 22, it had 31. By 23, it was formally dissolved by the Verek court, not punitively, not because of violations or political games. Simply because the pack had reached the threshold below which a pack could not sustain itself, and the court had a responsibility to the wolves in it to place them somewhere they could actually live. 32 lost ward wolves, minus one who had made it into a neighboring pack the previous spring, were transferred to the Verek Palace. Marin was among them. She was, by the designation that the wolf hierarchy used for those at the bottom of the ranking scale, an omega, not a term she had chosen, not a term that felt like truth to her, but a term that had been attached to her since adolescence, when the shift rankings had been conducted and she had come out at the quieter end of the scale. Less aggressive, less dominance forward, more likely to de-escalate than to escalate. In the Lost Ward pack, these qualities had been, not valued, exactly, but accepted. The pack was too small for strict hierarchy. Everyone did what they were good at, and Marin was good at organization, at record keeping, at the kind of quiet, methodical work that kept a small community functioning. In the Verek Palace, where hierarchy was everything and Omega meant the bottom rung of a very tall ladder, she was effectively invisible, which brought her to the east corridor, which brought her to the window seat, which brought her to the evening. She looked up from her book and found a man sitting on the floor of the corridor next to her window seat, eating his dinner with the same focused, unbothered attention that she had always privately believed was the true mark of a person who was genuinely comfortable in their own skin. She had not believed him, at first, when he said he would sit on the floor. She had thought it was a kind of joke, or a test, or something political she did not understand yet. He had pulled his jacket off, folded it, placed it on the corridor floor, and sat down on it with his back against the wall below her window seat. She had stared at him for several seconds. He had opened the book he was carrying. A book. He had also brought a book, and he had begun reading. They had eaten in silence for 11 minutes. Not uncomfortable silence. Not the brittle silence of two people pretending to ignore each other. The specific silence of two people who were both actually reading and also both aware, on some frequency below conscious attention, of the other's presence. Then he had said, without looking up, "What are you reading?" She had looked at her book. A territorial survey from the Verek archive. Eastern boundaries, pre-Reformation. The boundary markers don't match the current maps. He had looked up then, not with surprise, with attention, the real kind. Which boundary? The northeastern ridge. The current maps show the Greyvale border at the 3rd marker post, but the pre-Reformation survey puts it at the 5th. That's almost 2 miles of discrepancy. He had been quiet for a moment. "I know about that discrepancy," he said. She had looked at him. "It's been in dispute for 40 years, he said. The Greyvale pack claims the 3rd marker. The Holt pack, which held that territory before Greyvale absorbed it, documented the 5th. Nobody has ever fully resolved it because doing so would require either Greyvale to concede territory or the court to rule against a pack that has been compliant and cooperative for 4 decades. She had looked at the survey. "There's a third option," she said. He had set his book down. "The pre-Reformation survey includes a full set of natural boundary markers," she said. "Not just the posts. There's a creek described in the original document, the eastern tributary of the vast river. If the creek still runs where the 1887 survey placed it, it supersedes both marker systems because natural boundaries take precedence over installed markers under the original territorial code." He had looked at her for a long moment. "Have you verified the creek?" he said. "No," she said. "I only read this tonight." "How long have you been in the archive?" 6 months. "And you found this in 6 months?" "I found it tonight," she said. "I've been organizing the pre-Reformation section. It hasn't been properly cataloged since." She checked the index. 1962. He had looked at her with the specific attention of a man who had just encountered something he had not expected and was processing the implications. "What is your name?" he said. "Maren Ossold," she said. "Aldous Vane," he said, as though she might not know. She did know. She had known from the moment she looked up. She had simply been managing it. "I know who you are," she said. "And yet you didn't move," he said. "This is my window seat," she said. Something moved in his expression. Not humor quite, but the thing that lived near humor in people who didn't let it out very often. "Fair enough," he said. He picked up his book. She picked up hers. They read for another 20 minutes until the evening bell rang, and they both, separately, went back to their respective parts of the palace. He came back the next evening. She had told herself he wouldn't. She had told herself the encounter was a curiosity, the way occasionally powerful men were curious about the lowest-ranked people in their buildings, briefly, abstractly, then not at all. She had told herself not to build anything on it. He came back at the same time, with a plate and a book, and he sat on the floor in the same place. She had brought 2 books from the archive. She had told herself it was coincidence. She gave him the second one. It was the follow-up to the territorial survey, the companion document that cross-referenced the natural boundary markers. He looked at it. He looked at her. "You were expecting me," he said. "I was not," she said. "I brought 2 books. You brought the companion document to the survey you were reading when I arrived yesterday," he said. "And you gave it to me." She opened her own book. "The survey is more useful if someone follows up on the creek verification," she said. "You have the resources to verify it. I don't." "That's very practical," he said. "I'm a practical person," she said. He opened the companion document. They ate their dinner in the East Corridor window seat, one of them sitting in it, one of them sitting below it on the floor, and they read the territorial survey documents, and occasionally one of them said something about what they had found, and the other responded, and it was not romantic in the traditional sense, and it was not political in the traditional sense. It was simply real. Realer than most things in the Varek Palace, which was a place where almost everything had a layer of performance over it, where even genuine warmth tended to be displayed rather than simply present. This was not displayed. This was 2 people sitting in a corridor reading old maps and talking about creek beds. And Maren, who had been fine for 6 months, felt something she hadn't felt since before the dissolution of the Lost Ward Pack. She felt like herself. It became a thing. Not a declared thing. Not a scheduled thing. Simply a thing that happened. Aldous Vane appearing in the East Corridor in the evenings, for times in the first week, and then most evenings after that, sitting on the floor below her window seat because there was only one window seat and neither of them had addressed this fundamental architectural limitation. She did not know how to interpret it. She ran interpretations the way she organized archive documents, systematically, setting aside emotion and looking at evidence. He was the high alpha. She was an omega from a dissolved pack. The gap between those 2 positions in the wolf hierarchy was not merely large. It was nearly structural. It was the kind of gap that the entire system was built on. She was aware of this with a thoroughness that came from having lived at the bottom of that gap for most of her life. She was also aware that the bond had not arrived. This was the thing she kept coming back to. If he were her mate, if the pull she felt in his presence were the bond, she would know. She had felt the bond once, briefly, in her early 20s, with a wolf from a neighboring pack who had ultimately chosen someone else for reasons that had nothing to do with her. She knew what the bond felt like. She knew its specific, unmistakable quality. What she felt around Aldous Vane was not that. It was something else. Something that had grown over evenings and old maps and the specific pleasure of being talked to by a person who was actually listening. Something that was made of choice rather than biology, which in some ways felt more frightening. The bond arrived without asking. This other thing, whatever it was required both of them to keep choosing it. The palace noticed. Of course it noticed. The Varrock Palace was a community of several hundred wolves living in close proximity, and wolf senses were not well designed for discretion. Someone had seen him in the East Corridor twice. Someone else had connected this to the new Omega archival worker. The information had traveled in the way that information traveled in enclosed wolf communities, fast and thorough, and with embellishments added at each transmission. Marin found out what the palace was saying when Pell, another Omega transfer from the Lost Ward Pack, who worked in the palace laundry and who had a gift for absorbing ambient information, told her at breakfast with the expression of someone delivering something important and not entirely sure how it was going to land. Pell said that the palace's consensus was split between two theories. Theory 1. The High Alpha was conducting a kind of unusual pastoral attention, checking on the welfare of the new Omega transfers, the way powerful leaders occasionally made gestures in the direction of the least powerful members of their communities to demonstrate something. Theory 2. Something else was happening, and nobody wanted to say it directly, but the something else had a direction that made most of the palace's senior wolves uncomfortable. Which theory has more supporters? Marin asked. Pell looked at her. The second one, she said. And the people who support the second one are, she paused. They're not happy about it. Marin ate her breakfast. Who specifically, she said. Lady Vessa Thorne. Pell said carefully. And Advisor Crane. And, she stopped. And, Marin said. And about half the Senior Wolf Council. Pell said. Because Vessa Thorne has been, she searched for the word, positioned, for the past 2 years. As a possible, everyone knows that the High Alpha needs to formalize a bond eventually, and Lady Thorne is. High-ranking, Marin said. Alpha-born, old bloodline, strong shift, perfect for the position by every metric the Council uses to evaluate these things. Pell looked at her. You understand what I'm saying? Yes, Marin said. I understand. She finished her breakfast. She told herself this was information she could manage. She told herself she already knew the gap. She had always known the gap. She told him. Of course she told him. She had found, in the weeks of East Corridor evenings, that she was incapable of not telling him things. Not because she lacked discretion, but because he had a way of listening that made withholding feel like dishonesty, and she was not a dishonest person. She told him on a Thursday evening, with the north courtyard dark below the window, and both of them 2/3 through a correspondence file from the 1920s that was turning out to contain more useful boundary information than any of the formal surveys. She said, "There are things being said about us. In the palace." He did not look up immediately. Finished the sentence he was reading. Then looked up. "I know," he said. And they're not wrong that something is happening," he said simply. She looked at him. He was sitting on the floor with his back against the wall below her, completely at ease in the specific way he was always at ease. Not performing ease, just actually being in a state of calm that came from somewhere genuine. "You're the High Alpha," she said. "And I am an Omega from a dissolved pack." "Yes," he said. "Those are not small facts." "No," he agreed. "There is a woman," she said carefully, "who has been positioned as Vessa Thorne," he said. "You know, I know everything that happens in this palace," he said. Not arrogantly, just factually. Lady Thorne is exactly what the Council wants for me. She is strong and capable and well-connected, and she comes from a bloodline that would produce politically useful heirs. And, Marin said, he looked at her steadily. "And I have eaten dinner in this corridor 31 times, he said. She was quiet. "That doesn't answer the question," she said. "It does," he said. "You're not listening to what it says." She held his gaze. 31 times, she said. "You have had dinner with me 31 times. "Yes." "You sat on the floor," she said. There's only one window seat, he said. You've been sitting in it. You could have asked me to move. It's your seat, he said. You were here first. She looked at him for a long moment. Aldous, she said. The name still felt strange in her mouth. She had only used it for the last 2 weeks. Yes. What is this, she said. Directly. The way she asked things. What are we doing here? He set the correspondence file down on the floor beside him. He looked up at her. I come here every evening, he said, because it is the only hour of my day when I am not the high alpha, when I am not the center of a room, when I am not being assessed and consulted and required to be larger than I actually feel. He paused. You talk to me about creek beds and boundary markers and pre-Reformation survey methodology, and you have never once adjusted what you were going to say based on who I am. And I have been sitting on this floor for 31 evenings because this is the most honest space in the building. She held that. And, she said, and I enjoy your company, he said. Considerably. And, she said. He looked at her with those steady, deep eyes. And I am aware, he said carefully, that what I feel when I am in this corridor is not simply the enjoyment of honest company. The corridor was very quiet. The bond hasn't arrived, she said. No, he said. So it's a choice, she said. Yes, he said. It is a choice. She looked at him. I need you to understand what the gap means, she said. Not politically. I know you understand it politically. I need you to understand what it means from where I'm sitting. She paused. I have been in this palace for 6 months. In those 6 months, I have been invisible. Not unkindly invisible. Nobody has been cruel to me. I have simply been below the notice of almost everyone here. I eat in this corridor because the dining hall does not feel like a space that wants me. I work in an archive that nobody visits because nobody who ranks above Omega level has reason to look at pre-1960 territorial documents. She paused. I have built a life in the margins of this place. And what you are describing would pull me out of those margins into the center. And the center of this palace is not a place that will receive me well. He was very still while she spoke. When she finished, he said, Is that a no? She looked at him. It's a reality, she said. I need to know you've looked at it. I've looked at it, he said. I've been looking at nothing else for 2 weeks. And the council's discomfort is not sufficient reason, he said. And Lady Thorne, who is capable and admirable, is not my mate and has never been anything other than a political option. He paused. And you, Marin oscilled, found a 40-year territorial dispute in 6 months of archive work that 3 senior advisors have spent 2 decades ignoring. You are not marginal. You have been placed in a margin. Those are not the same thing. She felt something move in her chest. Not the bond. Something else. Something that was made of all 31 evenings. You have to understand, she said, quieter now, that if this becomes a thing, a real thing, I cannot be a secret. I will not be kept in a corridor. Not because of pride. Because I have already lived invisible for 6 months, and I will not live invisible inside something that is supposed to matter. I know, he said. That means the council, she said. That means Vessa Thorne. That means 200 palace wolves adjusting their assessment of what is possible in this hierarchy. Yes, he said. I know. You sound very calm about all of that, she said. I am the high alpha, he said. Adjusting the hierarchy is essentially my job description. She stared at him. And then, for the first time in 6 months, in the east corridor of the Varek Palace, Marin Ossold laughed. Not a polite laugh. A real one. Sharp and short, and surprised out of her. He looked pleased. Not the contained almost expression she had learned to read over 31 evenings. Actually pleased. There it is, he said quietly. There what is, she said. You've been careful with me every evening for a month, he said. That's the first time I've heard you laugh without thinking about it first, She felt her face warm. I didn't think about it, she said. I know, he said. That's what I said. She looked at the dark courtyard out the window. One step at a time, she said. Yes, he agreed. One step. The first step was the archive. Not the corridor, the actual archive. Marin brought all the Creek verification research she had been building from the pre-Reformation documents, organized into a formal brief that cross-referenced 17 separate sources and concluded, with reasonable confidence, that the vast river tributary still ran within 300 meters of its 1887 documented course, and that a formal survey would likely confirm the natural boundary precedents. He read it in one sitting. He said, "This would take a senior advisor 6 months to produce." I know, she said. I've been watching the senior advisors. Their approach to the pre-Reformation archive is, she paused, looking for the diplomatic word. Tell me honestly, he said. Negligent, she said. The documents are unfiled, uncatalogued, in some cases unshelved. The 1940s section is in a storage room rather than the main archive. There are boundary documents from the 1960s that contradict 3 current territorial agreements, and nobody has looked at them because the archive hasn't been formally reviewed since the current cataloging system was installed in 1989. He was looking at her with the specific attention she had learned meant he was processing implications quickly. What would you need, he said, to do a full review? She looked at him. Permission, she said. Official permission to access all sections, including restricted storage. An assistant. One would be enough, someone who can physically move and sort documents while I catalog. And about 2 years. 2 years, he said. The archive goes back 400 years, she said. Some of it. What do you need for the first 6 months, he said. The most urgent pieces. She thought about it. The boundary documents from 1940 to 1980, she said. That's the period where most of the current territorial agreements were established. If there are conflicts, they're most likely buried in that range. Consider yourself authorized, he said. I'll have the formal access paperwork processed today. She looked at him. She stopped. What, he said. You just did that, she said. I mentioned it, and you authorized it. It's reasonable, he said. The archive should have been reviewed years ago. You're qualified to do it. He paused. Is something wrong with that? She thought about the 6 months of invisibility. About the times she had submitted requests for updated cataloging supplies and waited 3 weeks for a response. About the senior archivist who had once told her the pre-Reformation section was not a priority. No, she said. Nothing is wrong with it. But something had just become very visible. The gap she had been telling herself to be realistic about, had a specific texture when seen up close. It was not abstract. It was made of supply requests and storage rooms and things that were not priorities because the person asking for them was not a person the hierarchy was paying attention to. What she had found in 6 months of invisible work was significant. It had only been significant when the right person looked at it. That was not a reflection of her value. That was a reflection of the system. She sat with that in the East Corridor that evening and thought about it for a long time. The council meeting was the second step. It was not Aldous' plan to bring her before the council. But the Creek verification brief had been too significant to contain. The northeastern boundary dispute had been a low-level drain on court resources for 4 decades, and Marin's research had provided a resolution path that would require formal council approval to action. The brief had to be presented. Aldous presented it himself first. He introduced the research, the source material, the methodology. He said clearly and directly that the work had been produced by Marin Ossold, an Omega-level archival worker from the recent Lost Ward Pack transfer. The council chamber had been, according to Brenna, who was everywhere in this story, or a woman named Brenna was, because every palace has a Brenna, very quiet when he said that. Not hostile quiet. Processing quiet. And then Advisor Crane, the senior territorial advisor, mid-60s, a man who had been managing the northeastern boundary dispute for 15 years as a maintenance issue rather than a resolution target, had asked to see the source documents. Marin was called to the council chamber. She walked in. She had been in the Varek Palace for 7 months at this point. She had eaten alone in the East Corridor for 6 of them, and in a window seat with the High Alpha for 1. She had never been in the council chamber. It was everything the corridor was not: formal, high-ceilinged, built for authority. 26 senior wolves around an oval table, every one of them ranked above her by every metric the hierarchy used. She stood at the presentation end of the table, and she felt 26 assessments moving over her simultaneously, and she did the thing she had learned to do in her 24 years of being at the bottom of hierarchies. She breathed, and she began to present. She presented the Creek verification methodology with the same focused, direct attention she brought to everything in the archive. She answered every question, and there were many, some of them genuinely probing and some of them testing, with specificity and confidence, because she had done the work thoroughly, and thoroughly was the only way she knew how to do things. The 40-year dispute had a resolution path. The creek still ran. She had the evidence. By the end of the presentation, Advisor Crane was nodding with the specific, involuntary quality of a man who has been proven wrong about something and is being honest enough to acknowledge it. He said, "This is extraordinary research." "Thank you," Marin said. "How long have you been in the archive?" he said. 7 months, she said. He looked at Aldous. Aldous did not look back at Crane. He was looking at Marin. The council approved the full archive review. Funding, an assistant, official access to all sections. Marin walked out of the council chamber and stood in the corridor and breathed for a moment. Brenna, who had been waiting in the anteroom with the alert readiness of someone who knew important things were happening, pressed a cup of tea into her hands. "How did it go?" Brenna said. "They approved it," Marin said. Brenna beamed. The third step was Lady Vessa Thorne. Marin had been expecting this conversation. She had been not expecting it in the way that people not expect things they know are coming, which is to say she had been bracing for it, while telling herself she wasn't bracing. Vessa Thorne came to the archive on a Friday morning. She was, in person, exactly what her reputation suggested: a tall, poised, alpha-born woman with the specific quality of someone who had been raised to occupy important spaces and had fulfilled that training completely. She was not unkind in her face. She was simply very certain of her own significance, the way people raised to significance often are. She sat down across from Marin's archive desk with the careful, composed manner of a woman who was controlling a situation. "I want to be direct," she said. "Please," Marin said. "I have been, for 2 years, the candidate most frequently discussed by the council for a formal bond with the High Alpha," Vessa said. "I am not naive about what a formal bond means or what it requires. I have prepared for it carefully." "I understand," Marin said. "And I want to ask you directly what your intentions are." Marin looked at her. "I don't think intentions is the right word," she said. "I eat dinner with him in the East Corridor. We talk about archive documents." Vessa looked at her steadily. "Marin, we are both too intelligent for that framing." Marin was quiet for a moment. "What would you like me to say?" she said. "Something true," Vessa said. Marin looked at the archive around her, the shelves of documents, the organized sections, the work of 7 months visible in the ordered rows. "Something is happening," she said. "I don't know what it becomes. I don't control what it becomes. But I am not going to pretend it isn't happening, because I am not built for pretending." Vessa looked at her for a long moment. "And the gap?" she said. "You understand what you're walking into. Omega. Dissolve pack. No bloodline to speak of, no political connections, nothing the council is looking for. I know exactly what the gap is, Marin said. I live in it. Then why are you not? Vesa stopped. Tried again. Why aren't you afraid of it? Marin thought about this genuinely. I've been afraid of the gap for 24 years, she said. I've been managing my life around it, making myself smaller to fit inside it comfortably. She paused. I'm not going to do that anymore. Not because of him, specifically, but because I found a 40-year territorial dispute that 3 senior advisors missed, and I solved it in 7 months. And I have been doing that kind of work for 24 years and calling it ordinary, and it is not ordinary. She looked at Vesa. I am not going to make myself smaller because the hierarchy says I should be smaller. Vesa was quiet for a long moment. She looked at Marin with an expression that was more complicated than Marin had expected. The council is going to push back hard, she said. I know. They'll question everything about you. Your bloodline, your rank, your background. I know. And you're not afraid. I'm terrified, Marin said. That's different from not going forward. Something shifted in Vesa's face. Not warmth. They were not at warmth. But something that was the precursor to respect. The moment when an assessment changes. All right, Vesa said. She stood. The 1960 Thorn Boundary Agreement is in this archive somewhere, she said, at the door. Section C, I believe. Row 12. If you're doing the full review. She paused. My family's documentation is complete and accurate. You'll find no issues there. She left. Marin sat at her desk for a moment. Then she went to Section C, Row 12. The council pushed back. Of course they did. Aldous had known they would, and he had been preparing for it with the same thorough attention he brought to everything he actually cared about. And Marin had known they would, and she had been building her own preparation in the form of doing her work so meticulously that every challenge to her competence would find itself without ground to stand on. They challenged her rank. Aldous said rank was a designation of pack hierarchy and had no bearing on individual capability, and he cited 3 historical precedents of Omega rank wolves who had held significant court positions. He cited them from memory. They challenged her bloodline. Aldous said the Lost Ward pack had held its territory for 80 years, longer than 2 of the current council members' own pack histories, and that its dissolution was an economic reality, not a reflection of the wolves within it. They challenged her suitability for the role of the High Alpha's partner. Aldous said that suitability was assessed on different criteria in different eras, and that in his assessment, which was, he noted, the assessment of the person most directly relevant to the question, what he had found in Marin Oswald was intelligence, honesty, precision, and a quality of genuine attention that was rarer in the Varek Palace than it should be. He said this in the formal council chamber. He said it with the specific, final tone of a decision that had been made. The council did not vote against the High Alpha. That was not how the wolf hierarchy worked. But the silence in the chamber after he spoke had a texture to it, a shifting, a recalibrating, 26 senior wolves adjusting the structure of what they believed was possible. Marin was in the archive that evening. Aldous found her there rather than in the corridor. He stood in the doorway and looked at the organized rows of shelves and the cataloged sections and the evidence of 7 months of systematic, invisible, significant work. The council has been informed, he said. I know, she said. Brenna told me. How do you feel, he said. She thought about it honestly. Exposed, she said. And also, she paused. Also like something that was held in very tightly has been let out. She looked at him. Both things at the same time. He walked into the archive. He stopped in front of the desk she was sitting at. He said, I told the council that you are the most capable person working in this palace in a role that does not reflect that capability. I told them the archive review has already produced more actionable territorial intelligence than the last decade of senior advisory work. He paused. I told them you are my choice. She looked at him. Your choice, she said. Not the bonds, he said. Mine. She stood up. She was shorter than him, significantly, in the way that the physical reality of people is sometimes unexpectedly clear up close. And she looked up at him, and she said, This is not going to be easy. No, he said. The palace is going to watch every single thing I do, she said. Every mistake, every limitation, every moment where the gap between my background and this position is visible. Yes, he said. And you know that you're standing here saying your choice anyway. Yes, he said. She looked at him. Why, she said. Not insecurely, genuinely wanting the full answer. He looked at her with those steady eyes. Because 31 evenings ago, I walked down a corridor I almost never use, looking for a quiet place to eat dinner, and I found someone sitting in a window seat reading a 60-year-old boundary survey and arguing with it under her breath. He paused, and I sat on the floor because the seat was taken and I did not want to leave. And I have not wanted to leave since. He paused again. You are the most honest thing in this palace. You are the most capable person I have met who has been most thoroughly under-resourced. And you look at the world with a precision and a care that makes everything look clearer when you're near it. He paused a final time. Those are not small things, Marin. She held all of that. You sat on the floor, she said quietly. There was only one window seat, he said. You could have gotten a chair. I didn't want a chair, he said. I wanted to stay. She reached out and put her hand in his. He held it. Not dramatically. Not with grand gestures. The way people hold things they have been carefully choosing for a long time. They stood in the archive, surrounded by 400 years of documented history, and the bond, not the faded bond, not biology, but the thing built from evenings and creek beds and honest conversation, and the specific, daily choice to keep showing up, settled between them like something that had been building its whole life toward this. The formal acknowledgement happened in spring, not a bonding ceremony. That would come later in its own time. The formal acknowledgement was what it said. Aldous presenting Marin to the full court in the great hall that she had been eating around the edges of for 8 months, standing at the head table and introducing her not as his Omega archival worker, and not with a political framing, and not with the kind of careful, qualifying language that powerful people use when they're apologizing for something with one side of their mouth, while declaring it with the other. He said, Marin Osselt, archival director, effective this month. And my partner. 2 things. 2 separate sentences. 2 equal facts. The hall it was not silent. But it had a quality of collective adjustment. 200 wolves recalibrating simultaneously. The way rooms do when the person at the top of the hierarchy says something that doesn't fit the room's existing structure, and the room has to decide whether to reshape itself. Marin stood at the head table. She had eaten in the window seat of the east corridor for 6 months. She was standing in the center of the room now. Her hands were still. Her chin was level. Her wolf, who had spent most of Marin's life at the lower end of every ranking, who had been called Omega and invisible and marginal in the bottom, her wolf stood tall inside her chest, and if a wolf could look satisfied, this one did. From the middle of the room, Pell caught her eye. Pell, who had told her about the palace's theories. Pell from the Lost Ward pack, who had spent 8 months in the laundry. Pell, whose face right now was doing something that required her to press her lips together very firmly and look at the ceiling. Marin almost laughed. She held it together. After the bond arrived in summer. She did not expect it. She had stopped expecting it. Honestly, had made peace with the idea that what they had was chosen and built and real and sufficient. She had stopped looking for the fated thing and found, in the stopping, that she no longer needed it. What they had did not feel incomplete. It arrived anyway. On a Tuesday evening in July, in the East Corridor, where they still ate sometimes, not every evening anymore, but sometimes, because that window seat was theirs and the North Courtyard was still dark in the evenings, and some things did not need to be improved. She was reading a restoration proposal for the archive's water-damaged 1890s section, and he was going through the council's response to the creek survey results. The survey had confirmed the tributary's position exactly as the 1887 document described, and the northeastern boundary had been formally redrawn the previous month after 40 years, when she looked up. He was looking at her, and she felt it. The specific, unmistakable quality of a bond that had been patient enough to wait until there was room for it. Not a new feeling. It was built from everything already there. Not an interruption to what they had. A deepening. A root system finding bedrock. She looked at him. She said, "There it is." He said, "Yes." She said, "It waited." He said, "Until we were ready." She looked at him for a long moment. "We found it ourselves first," she said. "Yes," he said. "We did." She looked back at her proposal. "I'll take it," she said. He made the sound she had come to treasure most. The sound that was not quite a laugh from a man who had spent years not quite laughing. She smiled at her proposal. Outside the window, the North Courtyard was dark and quiet, and above it the summer sky was full of stars, and inside the East Corridor 2 people were sitting, one in the window seat, one on the floor below it, reading documents about the past and being, without performance or announcement, in the present. Marin became archival director of the Verek Palace at 24 years old. The full archive review, the one she had estimated would take 2 years, took 22 months. In that time, she and her assistant found and resolved 9 active territorial discrepancies, flagged and updated 14 outdated boundary agreements, and produced a comprehensive catalog of the palace's historical records that the court's territorial council began using as its primary reference within a year of its completion. Advisor Crane said, at the year-end council meeting, that the archive review had produced more resolution than his entire tenure in the territorial advisory position. He said it generously. Marin received it the same way. Pell was promoted to head of the palace's residential logistics department 6 months after the formal acknowledgement. Not because of Marin's position, because once the hierarchy had been shown that Omega-rank wolves from dissolved packs were capable of significant work, some people in that hierarchy had begun, quietly, to look at what other capabilities they had been failing to see. It was not a revolution. Hierarchies do not change in revolutions. They change in the small, accumulated weight of moments where the standard assumption is proven insufficient and the more accurate assumption takes its place. One Omega archival worker finding a 40-year boundary dispute. One High Alpha sitting on the floor of a corridor because the seat was taken and he didn't want to leave. One slowly building evening after evening, creek bed by creek bed, old document by old document. There is something about being invisible that the people who have not been invisible do not understand. They think invisible means gone. Absent, not present. Invisible does not mean gone. Invisible means present and unseen. And the thing about being present and unseen for a long time is that you learn things that visible people never learn. You develop a precision of observation that comes from having to watch everything carefully because no one is watching out for you. You develop a quality of attention that comes from being attended to poorly. You know what real attention looks like because you have felt so much of the counterfeit. You develop, in the years of eating alone in corridors and working in uncatalogued archives and solving problems that nobody recognizes as problems because nobody is looking at that section of the shelf. You develop a depth, not a glamorous depth, Not the kind that gets noticed at welcome ceremonies. The kind that gets noticed by someone who sits on the floor of a corridor because there's only one window seat and they don't want to leave. Maren Oseld did not become significant when Aldous Vane noticed her. She had always been significant. He was simply the first person in the Varric Palace with the clarity to see it. And she had been waiting, not passively, not hopefully, but practically and productively. She had been waiting in that window seat doing the work, because the work was worth doing regardless of whether anyone was watching. That is the truest thing about this story. The work was worth doing. She had done it before anyone was watching. That is why she was worth watching. You do not become valuable when someone notices you. You become visible. Those are not the same thing. And if you are somewhere right now that has not noticed you yet, keep doing the work. Build the archive. Organize the shelf that nobody is looking at. The person who will eventually sit down on the floor of your corridor rather than leave. They are worth the wait. If this story found you tonight, if you are somewhere feeling invisible, feeling uncounted, feeling like the window seat in the corridor that nobody comes to, this is for you. Subscribe to this channel like you mean it. Right now, not because of an algorithm, not because of a number, because this channel makes stories for the people who eat alone, for the people who have been told by every hierarchy they have ever lived inside that they are the bottom of the list, for the people who are doing significant work in uncatalogued archives that nobody has thought to look at yet. We see you. We have always seen you. And if this story gave you something tonight, if it made the invisible feel seen, if it made the small feel significant, if it made the floor of an East corridor feel like the beginning of something, then subscribe, like this video, turn on the bell, and drop in the comments where in the world you are watching from. And tell me this, has anyone ever sat on the floor so they could stay near you? Or are you still waiting for that person? Either way, I want to know. Every comment, every single one. The next story is coming, and it is going to find you exactly where you are. Stay